Today, let us have a discussion on ecosystem, concept, definition, and aspect. Introduction. Everything in the natural world is connected. Living organisms that inhabit a particular area are always in the state of perfect balance with their environment. These organisms interact with each other and also with their abiotic environment in that area. Environment directly or indirectly influence life, distribution, abundance, development of the organisms and their populations. At the same time, organisms themselves, in part, define the physical environment also. Thus, organisms and their environment are interrelated. Recognition of this interrelationship and the complex system led to the development of ecosystem concept. Concept of ecosystem. An ecosystem is an integrated system composed of interacting community of organisms and the non-living environment functioning together within a fixed boundary. Origin of the ecosystem concept is the result of recognition of interaction of living and the non-living components of environment. The system concept of the environment have played a role in the development of ecology as a discipline. In the early 20th century, two dominant and competing ecological paradigms were the organismic view and individualistic view. The debate between the two different views were partly resolved by the introduction of ecosystem by A.G. Tansley in 1935. Original definition of the ecosystem presented by Tansley were an abstract concept free of intrinsic considerations of space or time boundaries. Some of the varying concepts related to ecosystem may be highlighted as follows. Year, term, author, concept. 1877, Biosynosis, Carl Moebius. The interacting organisms living together in a habitat. 1887, Microcosm, S.F. Forbes, Extension of Biosynosis. 1889, Geobiosinosis, V.V. Dokusev, Combination of biotic and the abiotic elements. 1914, Ecoid, Negri, Unholistic, based on Glissinian ideas. 1928, Ecologist System, Voltaire, Ecological Character Systems. 1930, Holocene, Frederick, Biologistic. 1939, Biosystem, Thin Man, Stretching Functional Organization. 1944, Geobiosinos, Sukachev, Geographic Landscape Ecological. 1944, Bioinert Body, Barnatsky, Biogeochemical. 1948, Biocore, Polman, Landscape Ecological. 1950, Landschaft, Troll, Holistic Gestalt Viewing. Among these concepts, the term ecosystem is most preferred, which implies an interacting, interdependent complex. In the concept of the ecosystem, the biological and the physical components of the environment are a single interactive system. Present concept of the ecosystem has evolved from Tansley's early concepts. New concepts include the ideas that species were believed to be interconnected as an unbroken natural chain, and the communities were considered to be natural cover of the landscape. In the present concept, an ecosystem is constituted of the biological community that occurs in some area and the physical and the chemical factors that make up its non-living or abiotic environment collectively. Sometimes, it may be difficult to define the boundaries and the properties of the ecosystem. The boundaries are not fixed in any objective manner. However, some may be distinct, such as shoreline of a small lake. An ecosystem's composition and this structure is determined by the state of a number of interrelated environmental factors. Changes in any of these factors will result in dynamic changes to the nature of these systems. For example, changes in nutrient availability, temperature, light intensity, grazing intensity, etc. would give drastic change in the ecosystem. The dynamic interactions that occur within an ecosystem are numerous and complex. The components of the ecosystem have relationship among themselves as well as those elements outside the ecosystem boundary. The degree of relationship may be different according to different ecosystems. The feature which distinguishes an ecosystem from any other unit of ecology is that it is a level of organization. An ecosystem is the smallest unit of biosphere that has all the characteristics to sustain life. A new concept of ecosystem called the mosaic cycle concept has been proposed by Remmert in 1991. The concept of ecosystem is relatively less sensitive to environmental perturbation than the previously considered models of a mobile balance of dynamism. According to this concept, ecosystem processes involve a continuous cyclic succession which can be demonstrated with examples from terrestrial, forest, and aquatic systems. Definition of ecosystem. There is a long history in the development of the concept of and the terminology of ecosystem in ecological history. The idea of unity of organisms and environment can be traced back to the late 1800s. The term ecosystem was first used by Sir Arthur George Tansley, English botanist and a pioneer ecologist, in a seminal paper in the journal Ecology in 1935. Actually, the term ecosystem was coined by Arthur Rees Clapham, who came with the word at Tansley's request. Tansley defined ecosystem as a, quote, whole system including not only the organism complex, but also the whole complex of physical factors forming what we call the environment of the biome, the habitat factors in the widest sense, unquote. He later defined the spatial extent of the ecosystems using a term ecotope. Francis Raymond Fosberg in 1963 has defined ecosystem as a functioning interacting system composed of one or more living organisms and their effective environment, both physical and biological. According to Raymond Laurel Lindman, 1942, the term ecosystem is applied to any system composed of physical, chemical, biological processes within a space-time unit of any magnitude. Woodbury, 1954, defined ecosystem as a complex in which habitat, plants and animals are considered as one interesting unit, the materials and the energy of one passing in and out of the others. According to Clark, 1954, the organisms and the physical feature of the habitat form an ecological complex, or more briefly, an ecosystem. According to O.P. Odum, 1959, the ecosystem is a unit that includes all the organisms, that is, the community in a given area, interacting with the physical environment so that a flow of energy leads to clearly defined trophic structure, biotic diversity, and material cycles, that is, exchange of materials between living and non-living within the system. Now, the concept has become important politically since the Convention of Biological Diversity was signed by almost 200 countries. According to Convention on Biological Diversity 1992, ecosystem is a dynamic complex of plant, animal, and microorganism communities and their non-living environment interacting as a functional unit. Aspects of ecosystem. Ecosystems has two major aspects, that is, the structure and the function. Structure of ecosystem. The structure of ecosystem means, number one, the composition of biological community, including species, numbers, biomass, life history, and the distribution in space, etc. Number two, the quantity and the distribution of the non-living materials, for example, nutrients, water, etc. Number three, the range or gradient of conditions of existence, for example, temperature, light, etc. On the basis of the structure criteria, ecosystem has two major components, namely abiotic non-living and the biotic living components. Abiotic components represent the physical environment and include the following. Number one, inorganic substances such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, etc. that involve in material cycle. Number two, organic compounds present either in the biomass or in the environment, for example, chlorophyll, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, etc. Number three, climate of the particular area. Biotic living components represent trophic structure of any ecosystem where organisms are distinguished on the basis of their nutritional relationships. These components can be divided into two categories, autotrophic and heterotrophic components. Number one, autotrophic components can synthesize their own foods. They are also called producers. For example, photosynthetic green plants, chemosynthetic bacteria. Number two, heterotrophic component acquire food from other sources. They are also called consumers as they consume the matter built up by the producers. They are divided into macro-consumers such as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and the micro-consumers or decomposers such as bacteria and the fungi. Function of ecosystem. The principal steps in the operation of ecosystem occur in the following sequences. Number one, reception of radiant energy of sun and captured by the photosynthetic organisms. Number two, manufacture of organic materials from inorganic ones by producers. Inorganic molecules are obtained from environment. Number three, consumption of producers by consumer and the further elaboration of consumed materials and also receiving energy. Number four, degradation of dead and waste materials by decomposers so that inorganic compounds are returned to the environment and made available to producers. Energy and the materials are transferred from one organism to another through food chain, that is, from one trophic level to next trophic level. However, in reality, the organization of biological system is too complicated that many food chains are interlinked together in an ecosystem. We call these linkages as food web. So, in an ecosystem, everything is connected to everything else. These processes are linked with primary production and homeostasis. Primary production is the production of organic matter from inorganic carbon sources. Ecosystem also has self-regulatory mechanisms. There are two dominant theories for this mechanism. The first called bottom-up control, which states that it is the nutrient supply to the primary producers that ultimately controls how ecosystem function. If the nutrient supply is increased, there is increase in production of autotrophs that will influence other trophic levels. The second theory called top-down control states that the predation and the grazing by higher trophic levels ultimately controls ecosystem function. If there is increase in predators, it will cause fewer grazers and the more primary producers will be increased. It is agreed that both the mechanisms are operating to some degree and neither control is complete. Considering the various processes, main functional aspects of ecosystem include: number 1, the rate of biological energy flow, that is, the production and the respiratory rates of the community. Number 2, rate of materials or nutrient cycles. Number 3, biological or ecological regulation, including both regulation of organisms by environment and the regulation of the environment by the organism. Common characteristics of most of the ecosystems have been summarized by Smith. Number 1, the ecosystem is a major structural and a functional unit of ecology. Number 2, the structure of an ecosystem is related to its species diversity in the sense that complex ecosystems have high species diversity. Number 3, the function of the ecosystem is related to energy flow and the material cycles within and outside the system. Number 4, the relative amount of energy needed to maintain an ecosystem depends on its structure. Complex ecosystems needed less energy to maintain themselves. Number 5, young ecosystems develop and change from less complex to more complex ecosystems through the process called succession. Number 6, each ecosystem has its own energy budget, which cannot be exceeded. Number 7, adaptation to local environmental conditions is the important feature of the vital components of an ecosystem, failing which they might perish. Number 8, the function of every ecosystem involves a series of cycles, for example, water cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, etc. These cycles are driven by energy. A continuation or existence of ecosystem demands exchange of materials, nutrients to and from the different components. Types. Ecosystems can be divided into different types. Number 1, natural ecosystems that operate by themselves without any major interference by man. Number 2, artificial ecosystems that are maintained by human influence, for example, agriculture, space ecosystems. Natural ecosystems may be divided on the basis of the habitat into, number 1, terrestrial ecosystem that can be found in the land masses of the earth. It can be again divided into forest ecosystem, desert ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, mountain ecosystem, etc. Number 2, aquatic ecosystem that can be found in a body of water. It can be marine or freshwater ecosystems. Conclusion. Ecosystem processes take place through the actions of individual organisms. The nature of the organisms, that is, the species, functional groups, and the trophic levels to which they belong, dictates the types of actions these individuals carrying out and their efficiencies. Thus, these processes are driven by the number of species in an ecosystem, nature of each individual species, and the relative abundance of these species. As such, biodiversity plays an important role in ecosystem functioning. Ecosystem provides a variety of goods and services to the human beings and the living world. Ecosystem goods include material products such as food, material, medicinal plants, tourism, recreation, genes for improving domestic species, etc. Ecosystem services are improvements in the condition or location of things of value and include hydrological cycle, air and the water purification, maintenance of oxygen in the atmosphere, crop pollination, research opportunities, etc. Ecosystems are dynamic and subject to periodic disturbances. When an ecosystem disturbs, it responds to move away from the initial state. As such, management of ecosystem is essential for sustainable utilization of resources as well as for maintaining the ecological balance.